The Crew franchise to me is probably going to be one of the most amazing things ever, and that's going to come down to the fact that we now have a game that did come out back in 2014, and then of course we also had Motorfest releasing in 2023, which of course is going to be around 9 years if we are mathing correctly. But I have to say though, the Crew 1 back then pretty much was the stepping stones of this franchise. And I have to admit, by the way, if you are wondering, I only have 3 minutes of gameplay for the Crew 1. Unfortunately, when I was on the game, I did actually complete the event, and then of course I got an error code. No matter what I can do after that, I cannot get back on the game, so I guess the game is ending in March, so it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. But my goodness though, playing the Crew 1 back in the day and noticing how amazing that game really was, I would say jumping on it like in 2024 right now before the game is over, you are most likely going to go, well, man, did I actually play this game back then like this? Like, did the graphics really look that bad? For some odd reason, old games to me did not really look like that in my mind. I really do not know why. But jumping back into the game and being able to do at least one event really did bring back a lot of memories for me. Like, I do remember that day being in that GameStop going, man, this game's going to be like the entire United States. I remember that guy going, yeah, probably not. It's probably just like a set photo for it or something. But if that really was to release back then, though, that was legit going to be the biggest racing game ever, or at least I guess you could say like one of them. But my goodness, though, having like the entire United States to basically drive on was going to be such an amazing experience. And of course, throwing in like different off-road vehicles and like all kinds of insane cars in there. And even to this day, though, I still go back and watch the Crew 1 trailer once in a while because, man, that was so iconic. I always remember the scene changing into, like, the off-road Camaro. The way, like, the bolts went in, like, the entire car was formed was amazing. I really did have such a great time playing that game back in the day. Like, I would say basically everybody playing the Crew 1 really did have a great time in it. And we probably really had no idea how far this franchise would have went. We also had, like, an insane story back in the Crew 1, which, funnily enough, that was the only Crew game that actually technically had a story. Do let me know what you guys think about the Crew 1 story in the comments below. Like, did you guys like it? What are some things you didn't? I have to say, though, I think it was pretty dang fun for the most part. We also had the Calling All Units and the Wild Run DLC, which of course were going to be insanely big for their own good. And we all do know we cannot beat around the bush in certain ways. Like, yeah, the Crew 1 had its own issues, like the lighting in that game at nighttime was an honest nightmare. Most of the time I would not even drive around at night because my headlights were non-existent, even though the AI driving around the map somehow had working headlights, but I did not. So going off-road and stuff like that at nighttime was pretty much almost impossible. And then of course the game was crashing left and right, like you couldn't see your friends, which of course is happening right now in Motorfest, but back then you also could not see your friends, you could barely even stay in a lobby. I remember back in the day there was one issue going on for like a week or two, where you would basically log on and be able to play around 20 to 25 minutes at a time, and then of course you would get kicked out and have to log the game back up. I also remember, by the way, guys, back in the day, I could not get on the Crew 1 for legit 3 months. Not even kidding, I had an error code that long I could not even play the game. I even contacted Ubisoft support back then, they said they were working on it. And then finally, after all that time, I was able to get back on it, but 3 months have passed and I basically started playing like Destiny and stuff like that, so it was kind of unfortunate how that did end up happening, but we all can say technology does break here and there, so I guess I really can't get all that mad. But we then end up fast forwarding to the release of the Crew 2, which is going to be June 29th of 2018. At least I think that's the release date. Something around there, being around, I guess, 4 years or so after the Crew 1 did come out. That game was basically like an upgraded version of the Crew 1. We had like the entire map being completely upgraded with like graphics. We also got a ton of new cars and all kinds of changes to the game itself. And on top of that, though, they also did end up changing the way the vehicle classes did work, which I would say the way they were in the Crew 2 was like night and day compared to the Crew 1 before. We also saw differences to like the menu UI and like the overall like sound design of the vehicles, which was also going to be heavily improved in the Crew 2. And then of course we also saw different changes to like the summits and stuff like that, but overall I would say the Crew 2 was going to be a huge jump forward compared to the Crew 1 before, and I would say that was probably like the biggest thing ever. I have to admit, by the way, guys, how many times can you say a game does actually get better over time? Like, with each one that releases, sometimes they do get worse. Or, of course, with each DLC, the game does tend to get worse as well. name a few games in the comments below you also would have to agree with that on. I would say this can also go for like a movie franchise as well. Not going to mention any names here, but the more they actually release on something, the worse it can get. Crazily enough though, the Crew 1 and the Crew 2 was going to be a huge difference, and the Crew 2 was basically like the biggest step forward ever. That game also was out for around 5 years with content coming out around those 5 years it was out. Obviously the Crew 2 is, out still, and still getting updates as well, which by the way is insane. And then on the flip side of that, we also had like a different design to the way the game was as well. Like for example, the Crew 1 did have like an actual story. I guess you could say a lot of players did like it, some didn't. I personally did enjoy the story with Alex. I also remember that iconic ending with like the 510s. Not gonna ruin that if you have not played the game. But my goodness though, moving over to the Crew 2, you did see like a difference with how it was. Like it was going to be designed with like disciplines and like different class vehicles. We had like all kinds of like crazy planes and hovercrafts and all kinds of stuff like that. So you also saw like the entire series basically evolving. You also could switch between like vehicles seamlessly, like jumping into like a plane and like going onto your car, then flying into a boat. It was pretty dang awesome how you could indeed do that. On the top of that, we also had like the entire part design in this game being different. We basically went into like an entirely new like part design system in the Crew 2 that was going to be a huge step forward compared to like the Crew 1 before, where you would basically have like a regular platinum part that would then go on that said vehicle, and you would have to fill in like every class like weight reduction, like exhaust and stuff like that. Once you were maxed out, you were basically good to go. Fast forwarding to the Crew 2 though, we also had a lot of different parts that you can go after. And of course on top of that, you also had like a bunch of affix-it stats you can re-roll, so it really did add like an entire aspect of grinding and like all kinds of different things you could go after, which I would say any game you most likely want to have like a design like that to where you could obviously jump on and always want to go after something different, whether it's going to be like cars or like money or like different parts you can get or maybe like upgrading different cars and customizing them. So you really can see when being on like the Crew 2 that they basically took everything about the Crew 1 and made it 10 times better. And of course on top of that they also built upon other things players did ask for and things they probably thought would be a lot better for that game. One of the biggest things I would say about the Crew 2 was also going to come down to the way they did end up changing the overall design of the summits. Now the Crew 1 did also have summits, but it was going to be a lot different than it was in the Crew 2. Like, it has been a minute since I have been on that game and of course was able to do a summit. I do know back then though it was probably going to be a mixed summit with PvP in the summit itself. And you also pretty much had to do it monthly. I don't think it was weekly like it was in the Crew 2, which by the way was like one of the best design changes ever. That way of course players can jump on weekly and go after the rewards. And also on top of that the summits were changed in basically every way. It had the skills in there and like all of the events as well, pretty much removing PvP from the summit itself, and then having like all of the players go against each other for the vehicles, which by the way having the vehicles in the summits was freaking amazing. We also get to see that in the Crew Motorfest as well, which is great. And I would say over time we're probably going to see some insane cars and like upgrades and stuff like that, but I really would say guys the Crew 2 really is going to be an insanely evolved game compared to the Crew 1. Then also taking a turn down the evolution lane a bit more, we're also then going to see the Crew Motorfest coming out September 14th, 2023, which is around 5 years after the Crew 2 has came out. And I would say a lot of players are most likely wondering like, why did they end up making another game on like a different map? I would have to say guys, and I would admit that they most likely did not want to use the exact same map a third time. Like, keep in mind the Crew 1 did come out in 2014, so if they did end up having the exact same map again, they could like update the graphics or like maybe go on a different engine, but it's still going to be the exact same map 10 years later. And I would almost guarantee most players would have ended up not being happy with it, so seeing Hawaii show up in Motorfest probably was the best option, which by the way that tropical island is absolutely beautiful. The graphics in Motorfest compared to the Crew 2 is like not even the same thing. Like, one thing I did notice right off the bat, even playing in the Crew Motorfest beta, even back in the day, I could not believe how good the game did look. The coloring and stuff around the map is absolutely beautiful, and one of the best things, by the way, is you can see what you are doing at nighttime. That was still going to be an issue in the Crew 2 before, so you can see how some of the issues did carry over, but It is going to be hard for me to actually get mad at that though, because we do know having a map as big as the Crew 1 and the Crew 2, you are most likely going to have issues that might end up following, and of course also carrying over to the next game. But of course looking at Motorfest though, we're going to see a lot of changes to the entire map design, from cruising around the map with like having a storm or like having a crazy sunset in the background. The overall coloring of the map really is going to be beautiful. I also do want to say something right now that most likely is going to have a lot of mixed opinions on it. The smaller map in Motorfest is by far the right decision instead of having the exact same map from the Crew 2. There I pretty much had to get that off of my chest. But I would say at the same time, a lot of people are most likely going to agree with it. Like, yes, the Crew 1 and the Crew 2's map is obviously huge. You can cruise around like the entire redesigned version of the US. And on top of that though, most of the map isn't going to be like that great of colored, or like the graphics might not be as good because the map is so big. And then of course looking at the Crew Motorfest, you will have a smaller map, yes, but you're also going to have better graphics and the entire map is going to be a lot more vibrant. Now I do know some people can argue like, yeah, we probably do need like pedestrians walking around, or like even in some places maybe more traffic, which I would say stuff like that is most likely going to happen in the future. On top of that though, we also have the car designs and also the car sounds are going to be unmatched compared to the other two games. Like, my goodness guys, listening to the cars in Motorfest is so much fun. You also finally hear like the turbo flutters or like the superchargers, which I could say they could probably slightly increase like the supercharger sound a bit, but my goodness, the way the turbos sound, like listening to like a Lamborghini at high RPMs, it really is going to be so dang addictive. And on top of that, we also have like the entire wheel finally turning, which by the way, getting on the Crew 2 and noticing how it doesn't turn on certain vehicles was honestly kind of making me a bit more mad than it should have. And then on top of that, we also have like the part design system coming into this game and most likely being upgraded even more. We finally have like an actual buck set where you can use that to farm money, which by the way is going to be so much better than before. You're also then going to have like the legend point system, which is of course going to be similar to the icon point system. And I would say I do like the way the icon point system is. And I really do feel like a lot of players are going to love these small amount of details, like having the full steering wheel lock is going to be so dang awesome in first person mode. I do know on the same side of the argument of that you can't say the mirrors do not work. Who knows though, maybe in the future we might end up seeing the mirrors being fully functional, which from what I have seen, and if I did have to guess, it most likely might come down to like the performance of the game itself, and they were most likely not adding that into the game so it can run better. Now, one thing I really do have to admit though, guys, my goodness, the Crew franchise has evolved so much in a positive way, which we can definitely admit many games do not get better over time. I really do hate to say this, but I am going to make more videos on that Need for Speed issue as well. Like, we can definitely agree that the more Need for Speed games that did come out, the worse the franchise did get over time. Like, sure, each game had like better things that came out with them, but every 2 steps forward they basically went one back, so it pretty much like evened out and probably made it worse. Now, one thing I do know a lot of players are probably looking for is when is more stuff going to come out on Motorfest. I'm also planning a separate video going over some of this stuff as well. But I would say give this game some time, guys. Like, I do know it's only going to be out for around 4 months now, but I really do feel like Motorfest is going to be incredible. We also have the Grand Race, which by the way is so much dang fun to play. Now imagine like the entire PvP system being updated to where you can pick like different vehicles or like run different classes and stuff like that in separate events. On top of that, we also have like a bunch of new events and more cars being added. I really do feel like Motorfest can be one of the best racing games ever. So definitely give Motorfest a chance though, because I really do feel like in the future this game is going to be absolutely incredible, and I really cannot wait for it. At the same time, I have to say though, guys, I really cannot believe how much this series has evolved. Like, jumping back in the Crew 1, then going into the Crew 2, and jumping on Motorfest, you really can see a huge positive difference in every single game. Which for me, by the way, is probably going to be one of the best things you can witness, like seeing each game improve every time they do release. Which right now, of course, we are seeing many games come out that do seem to get worse every single time they release, which is honestly terrible. But I would like to know what you guys think about the entire Crew franchise in the comments below. I really do feel like each game brought like their own great things to each one, and I really cannot wait to see where this entire franchise goes in the future.